All right, for the lesson at present, we are now going to look at a short article by Clifford. His article is short, brutal, and disconcerting. Clifford himself died extremely young at 34 years of age, and today he's basically known for this short article published in the same year that he died. He also wrote a promising essay in physics and indeed seems to have been having some insights that would have eventually led him towards general relativity if he had been allowed to continue that. He had a double appointment actually in applied mathematics and philosophy in his short life while he was a professor, a very talented young man. Now, I had often seen this article of Clifford referred to, but I'd like to share with you that I had not read it until I became a professor. And in many ways, I'm very glad about the way that this took place. What happened is essentially the following. When I started teaching at Idaho State University, Introduction to Philosophy, I began receiving a lot of anthologies for free in the mail because the companies wished me to adopt them because then they sell many copies to my students. This Clifford article was included in many of the anthologies, though it happens not to be included in the one that I use at present. This led me in 2005 to finally get around to reading it. And as I've said, I am glad that I put it off because the article impacted me greatly. If I had read it as an undergraduate, I think it would have had less impact than it had by reading it so much later. Clifford's thesis is that it is immoral to hold beliefs upon insufficient evidence. A great many of our beliefs, then, even if they happen to be true, but if they're being held on flimsy evidence or no evidence at all, are not really mistaken, are likely to be mistaken, but are out and out immoral. We do not have a right to hold such beliefs. And Clifford argues convincingly that in some cases, this could even lead to criminal prosecution if something happens on the basis of a belief that lacks evidence. And the whole ship owner example that he begins this article with is meant to illustrate this. Now, there's an air of Socrates about Clifford. And if you do not feel ill at ease when you finish reading the article, then perhaps you have not understood him, and you should read the article again. Implicitly, he's making an uncompromising, inescapable accusation. He should push us to take our beliefs much more seriously. So he fits into the series of lessons that I do about forming rational beliefs and taking beliefs seriously. Let me illustrate the way that he impacted one of my beliefs, just to choose a particular one. Now, when I read the article, this made me reflect, what about my own beliefs? Do I really have good evidence to support the beliefs that I was holding? And in some cases, I was forced to admit that no, I'm holding that belief on inadequate evidence. And if I accept his argument, which I did come to accept his argument, then I have to give up that belief or I have to change the way that I hold the belief. One of the things that Clifford does not illustrate very well in his article is a distinction between weakly held and strongly held beliefs. I think this has to be added to his article as I explain in my notes. So in some ways, a lot of my beliefs were modified. I went from holding them probably way too strongly, given the lack of evidence that I had, to holding them merely very weakly and sometimes simply suspending judgment. Now, one case in point would regard nuclear power. I'm of the opinion, or was of the opinion at least, that nuclear power would be a response to many of our energy problems, that nuclear waste is not nearly as big of a problem as it is made out to be. The security issues are also not as big of a problem as they are made out to be for later generation nuclear power plants. The problem is that essentially people are ignorant about the nature of radioactivity, about living on a radioactive planet, and they are a little bit panicked about something that they don't understand, like radioactivity, as well as low confusion between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. Now, how good is my evidence for a belief that nuclear power plants would solve many of our energy problems if we would only develop them much more extensively? Well, it's based essentially on conversations with physicists, some of who work in that area, and on regular reading of Scientific American, and especially on the development of later generation power plants. Yet I'm no nuclear physicist, and I really don't understand some of the issues involved with the engineering problem. I also had to recognize that I neglected some of the critical literature, some of the literature that was critical of the development of nuclear power plants, and they might have points that I am simply failing to consider. Now, let's take a hypothetical scenario. Let's imagine that I had it within my power to develop the energy network of a given state. Previously, before reading Clifford, I would have pursued nuclear power with very little hesitation because I held the belief stronger than I should. After reading Clifford, however, I realized that my evidence really wasn't that good. I simply did not have a sufficient understanding of the issue to hold that belief strongly. So, if I were placed in the same position, then I would not develop nuclear power plants extensively. What I would do is investigate the issue in much more detail to gather together a committee to really verify that this was going to work in the way that I thought it might work, to listen much more extensively to criticisms of the idea, and to really force myself to try to recognize any merit that might be in those criticisms that would indicate that that was not the policy to pursue. So, in other words, lowering the belief from being held strongly to being held weakly would lead to very different actions if I had it within my power to take such actions. And this was a direct result of reading Clifford, a modification of one of my beliefs, and there were others as well. Moreover, after I read Clifford's article in 2005, I was very impressed. But as an experienced philosopher at that time, I didn't simply accept the article and be done with it. No. My next interest was to see whether or not there were criticisms of the article that I was simply missing. So I researched the secondary literature to find if there were responses that ended up showing the article as inadequate. Now, by far the most interesting is that of William James and his article, The Will to Believe, which, for the record, I was already familiar with, even if I was not familiar with the original article of Clifford. Nonetheless, looking through those different responses convinced me that Clifford's argument actually comes through pretty much unscathed, as I point out in my notes. I wanted to share with students, however, some of the responses that are made to Clifford's article as a way of illustrating how philosophers would approach this sort of issue and how you would have different views regarding it. So I share also in my notes four responses among the responses that I found to Clifford. I share with you four of them that I found to be of particular interest. I hope you find this article of Clifford interesting. If you find yourself a little bit disconcerted by it, that's all the better.